Hey guys, I wanted to show you how you can use the Spigots app to call out to an API and either push data, write data back, or do both. Some people will call this a declarative call out because I didn't have to write any Apex or Flow to make this work. So first what I did was I made a named credential for an API I'll be using called the Exchange Rate API. And it does have an external credential to it with principal attached. And I did have to give my running user explicit access to the exchange rate API principal token um, because recall that even if it's an admin, it needs explicit access to fields and principals and things that the Spigots app will be interacting with. So here's a report showing a new field I added called the exchange rate. And what we're seeing is that this is getting filled lower and lower. And let's take a look at how that's happening. So we have a spigot here called write back exchange rate data. It is using the always running schedule. And for input, we're giving it a set of leads that have a null exchange rate and a currency code that's not equal to null. I set the limit to 10 because in this case, there's going to be one HTTP call out per record that runs through the spigot. So we really don't want it to be more than 100 because we know that um, each transaction can only have 100 callouts. So I chose 10 as kind of a nice middle ground for this. Um, and we also have two actions. In this case, the run order matters because we want to call out to the API before we try to access data from that call out to write back to the lead. Um, so first we call out to the API. We're referencing our named credential, and then we give a path, which includes a formula field, in this case, input.currency code. We're giving some extra request headers. We're using the get request method, and the type here was HTTP callout. Now, the second part of this is the write back. So this is an action of type sObject subtype update on the lead. The lead's ID will be the ID of the input lead. In other words, the same lead that was put through the spigot. And the exchange rate field, we are setting to quite a long formula. And this is something in spigots where we can reference previous actions that have run to get data that they wrote to the change map. So let's recall what exactly the change map is. The change map is something that we see get logged to every app run log, showing us things like the rendering of formulas and the results of HTTP callouts and other things. So if I just put these side by side, this is the ID of the previous action that did the callout. And we're referencing within that the response attribute and then response body, which is down here, which we parse as JSON. So we're looking at this. And then we get the rates attribute, the EUR attribute, and then the rate inside of that. So this is actually the same as running this. So here we can see the payload that we're actually parsing, where we get um, the response body, and then we go into the rates attribute, the EUR attribute, and then the rate attribute. Um, when we make callouts in Spigots, we also log an HTTP request log, which has all the fields. I wanted to be very clear about when callouts are happening because you may have API limits or be getting charged by some of these APIs. And I wanted to make sure that you have very clear visibility into how many times you're calling out, when the callouts happened, what was the request, what was the response. But these logs do not contain your secrets for authorization because that was done through the name credential and it doesn't appear in the response or request headers that we have access to. So this is it actually working. We see that the spigot has moved down, and when new leads are created in just a minute, they won't have this data just yet, but the spigot will very quickly fill it in. So this can be used for a variety of use cases. Some I've run into are, for instance, lead retention API, where based on a lead status change, we want to give feedback to the lead source vendor. Um, In this example, we're bringing exchange rate, say, to a custom field or a custom object. And there's just so many other examples where we will either want to push or receive data when something happens to a record in Salesforce. The beauty of this too is that it is going to retry until the record no longer meets the criteria. So in some ways, we may want to be mindful that we're not hitting that API too frequently. But if the API temporarily goes down, this is still going to automatically pull the data as soon as that API is back up. And we know that we're still only going to send a successful request once because when the request is successful, we write back data, preventing that lead from entering the spigot again.